I never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would end up in a legal battle against my very own homeowners association. But here we are. My name is Michael Lawson, and up until just 6 months ago, I believed I was living a peaceful and quiet life in the Oak Estates community. For nearly 15 years, I've served as a district court judge, but I've always preferred to keep a low profile within my neighborhood. I like to maintain a firm boundary between my professional duties and personal life, or at least I used to. That all changed when Deborah Wilson, the president of our HOA, decided to make my 1967 Mustang convertible her personal mission. It all began last summer when I finally completed the restoration of my late father's vintage Mustang. It was a beauty midnight blue with flawless chrome details, the result of 3 years of painstaking weekend work. Every detail had been meticulously restored to perfection. My father had passed away 5 years prior, and rebuilding his prize car was more than just a hobby for me. It was my way of preserving his memory, keeping a piece of our family history alive. That Mustang wasn't just metal, rubber, and leather. It was a time capsule filled with cherished memories, shared moments, and the bond my father and I had built over the years. The first hint of trouble came on an otherwise uneventful Tuesday morning. As I stepped outside, ready to leave for work, I noticed a white envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Puzzled, I unfolded it. An HOA violation notice. Vehicle in violation of community aesthetic standards. Must be stored in garage or removed from property within 48 hours. I was stunned. My driveway was spacious. The Mustang was in pristine condition, and nowhere in the HOA bylaws did it state that classic cars couldn't be parked outside. This had to be some sort of mistake. That afternoon, I called the HOA office, determined to clear up the issue. To my dismay, I was transferred directly to Deborah Wilson herself. Mrs. Wilson. I began in a calm and measured tone. I've thoroughly reviewed our community covenants, and there's nothing that prohibits restored classic cars from being parked in private driveways. Her response was clipped and icy. Mr. Lawson, the board has recently reinterpreted Section 8.3 regarding vehicles of unusual appearance. Your antique falls under that category. The decision is final unless overturned at the next quarterly meeting, which is 3 months from now. I exhaled sharply, keeping my frustration in check. I'd like to request a special meeting to address this interpretation. It seems like an arbitrary application of the rules. Request denied. She cut me off instantly. The board is not obligated to hold special meetings for individual complaints. Remove the eyesore or face escalating fines. Before I could get another word in, the line went dead. That evening, I stood by my living room window and watched as Deborah drove past my house. Slowly, her phone held up as she snapped photos of my car. Our eyes met. Instead of looking embarrassed at being caught, she gave me a smug, knowing smile and waved. I should have realized then that this was more than just an HOA issue. This was personal. The following weekend, as I was sipping coffee on my front porch, I noticed Deborah marching up my walkway, a middle-aged man trailing behind her. "This is Roger from the Architectural Committee," she announced without so much as a greeting. "We're documenting continued violations." I calmly set down my mug. "Good morning to you too, Deborah. Roger, nice to meet you. I'm still waiting for clarification on which specific bylaw my car is violating." Roger shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Section 8.3 does mention. It mentions vehicles in visible disrepair and commercial vehicles." I interjected, neither of which applies to my Mustang. I've read the bylaws front to back multiple times. Deborah's face turned a shade darker. "The board has discretion in interpreting community standards, Mr. Lawson. This isn't a courtroom where you can argue technicalities." Oh, if only she knew. Actually, Deborah, proper procedure and clear interpretation of written rules are vital in any organized society. I'm merely asking for consistency in the application of our community covenants. She folded her arms. "Your car is an eyesore that's reducing property values. Multiple neighbors have complained." I raised an eyebrow. "May I see these complaints?" Our bylaws require documented grievances for violations. Roger avoided my gaze. Deborah's lips pressed into a thin line. "Those records are confidential." Her tone was final. The fine is now $100 per day, retroactive to the first notice. With that, she turned on her heel and walked away. Something wasn't adding up. That afternoon, I went door to door, speaking to my neighbors. Not one of them had an issue with my car. In fact, several had admired it and even asked for rides. Mr. Henderson, the retired mechanic next door, had even helped me with the restoration. The so-called complaints were a fabrication. The next morning, another notice appeared on my windshield. This one threatened imminent towing if the vehicle wasn't removed within 24 hours. That was it. I sent a certified letter to the HOA board formally contesting the violation and demanding proper documentation. I also installed a security camera aimed directly at my driveway. I had a sinking feeling I was going to need proof soon. 3 days later, while attending a judicial conference in Chicago, I received a frantic call from Mr. Henderson. "Mike, they towed your car this morning. That Deborah woman was here with a tow truck at 7 a.m. I tried to stop them, but she had paperwork she claimed gave them authority. I took pictures. I'll send them to you." A cold knot of anger formed in my stomach. Did they say where they were taking it? Some impound lot. Citywide towing, I think. Deborah was practically gloating, saying something about rule breakers learning expensive lessons. I caught the first flight home the next morning and drove straight to Citywide towing. But when I arrived, my blood ran cold. My car wasn't there. According to their records, the Mustang had been claimed by the HOA under abandoned property disposition after only 24 hours. That was impossible. I stormed into the HOA office. "Where is my car?" The receptionist hesitated before sliding a piece of paper across the counter. An auction notice. My stomach dropped. My father's Mustang had been sold in a private auction for $7,500, barely a fraction of its true value. Who purchased it? I demanded. I'm not authorized to disclose that information. That was all I needed. You tell Mrs. Wilson that Judge Michael Lawson is filing an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning, and that is not a request. By the time I was done, my Mustang was back in my driveway. The HOA board had been replaced, and Deborah? Well, let's just say she won't be pulling scams like this again. Sometimes, the most important legal battles aren't fought in courtrooms, but right in our own driveways.